So thanks for joining us, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're connecting to this webinar from. My name is Josh Long. As I was just so wonderfully introduced, I'm the developer advocate for the Spring projects at Pivotal. And Pivotal, by the by, is the new home of Spring. It's where the Spring team and all the great open source Apache 2 license projects and so on moved in April of this year. It's a new company. Founded on open source, so we're the new home of Spring, including RabbitMQ, Redis, the Grails project, the Groovy leadership, Apache Tomcat leadership, Cloud Foundry, the open source platform as a service, a Hadoop distribution, lots of really just a great open source stack for dealing with today's problems and building for tomorrow's needs. Very, very, very forward-thinking, very programmer-facing, and of course, at the heart of all this, Spring is the sort of component modeling glue. For those of you who have used Spring before, you'll probably know that there can be a lot of different options, a lot of different choices. So to help sort of better understand that field is this diagram here, right? So the top level here is the I/O execution layer. This layer, if you look at the diagram, describes the technologies in the Spring stack that help you deal with processes. And of course, that's a very low-level, metaphor or idiom. But basically, Spring XD is a turnkey appliance for dealing with large and real-time data processing solutions. And Spring Boot is our focusing of attention for Spring applications. It's a way of building applications using convention over configuration as far as possible. And of course, Grails is our Groovy language rapid application web framework that needs no introduction. And all of these technologies sit on top of the rich sort of wealth of APIs and libraries that Spring provides, including support for integration, batch processing, big data, web applications, reactive or otherwise, etc. And of course, all of that, in turn, sits on top of our common data support for NoSQL, NewSQL, not only SQL, and SQL-type data stores. And then all of that further sits on top of things like the core framework, and it can work with common things like Spring Security. So when you see Pivotal out there, it's still us. We're still the same team. We have a new home on the web, by the way. We're actually now at spring.io. So if you go to springsource.org, you'll be redirected to spring.io. There you'll find lots of great getting started guides that take about 10 to 15 minutes to complete to see completed. You follow the guides and you can see every step of the way required to achieve a certain task. So if you let's see, spring.io. Of course, it's important that you have a browser. So you can go here. You can see there's access to the guides, the projects, the blogs, etc. This application is itself a Spring application. It runs on top of Cloud Foundry. So, and that will itself be open sourced a little bit later. So, looking forward a little bit, Spring 4 is just around the corner. It's within, I believe we're saying it's the 12th of this month. Actually, we'll have it available. So you can expect to see that very, very soon. And Spring 4, as all Springs before it have been, is very much a framework for the JVM. It's not just a Java language specific framework. And what this means is, in practice, is that we have good support for different versions of Java, of course, and alternative support where appropriate. People think that you need to use XML to configure beans in Spring, and that's just not so. In point of fact, you haven't needed to use it for a long time. You can do things entirely inside of Java, or you can use Groovy or Scala or what have you. Spring doesn't care where it gets the information about which classes you have in your application and how they need to get wired up together, etc. As long as you do provide it, right? So we've provided different APIs to help you explain this stuff to Spring. So for example, if you're using the Spring Scala project, again, Scala is a nice language to use inside of IntelliJ, so there's no reason you couldn't. If you're using the Spring Scala project, then you could use the functional configuration API. Here you can see we're defining different beans using a DSL, taking advantage of some of the dynamic features of the Scala language. We can also use the Groovy Bean Builder. This, of course, has been around for a long time inside of the Grails project, and inside of Spring 4, we'll see it merged into the core. The Groovy Bean Builder, again, uses the DSL that's provided by the Groovy language, which is another technology that works very nicely inside of IntelliJ. And of course, Java configuration. So this style has been around since we introduced the Spring Java Config project in 4 or 5, and that support got merged into the core in 2009. And so here we have a class which has a configuration annotation, and each bean is basically the description. Each bean method is the equivalent of a bean tag in XML. The return value becomes the actual class, and then of course any bean ID can be specified in the bean annotation, or the method name itself can be used to derive a bean ID. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to configure your application, and of course with things like Spring Boot, which we'll look at in a little bit, there's often very little need to do even this kind of configuration at all. Java 8 is of course a very, very interesting destination for Spring applications. It has a lot of great features, things I'm really excited to see finally in the platform, as I'm sure most of you are as well. One of those features, of course, is Lambdas. This is something that I think a lot of us in the community have been waiting for. It's a little awkward that in the C++ community, a language whose governing body meets but once or twice a year, if that sometimes, even they have Lambdas already, and we don't. So I think it'll be very, very good to finally get the support. Last I heard, the support was due first quarter next year. That might slip a little bit, but either way, it's imminent. So I'm excited. And of course, IntelliJ has had great support for Java 8 for more than a year, which is another reason why there's no reason to be afraid to get started with this stuff now. One thing that I really, Lambdas go hand in hand with another feature that I like in Java 8, which is the method reference syntax. Here I've got the typical JDBC template example where I'm issuing a query and I'm passing the second argument. There's an instance of Spring's row mapper. Row mapper is an interface that has just one method. This is called a functional interface inside of Java 8. And functional interfaces can be substituted for method references that provide the same return value and the same method arguments. It doesn't matter what the name of the method itself is, of course. So here, instead of a row mapper anonymous class, I can just provide a reference to the map method, which is very convenient. This is the great thing. To make it even more concise, to make it even cleaner, you can use inline lambdas or sort of anonymous lambdas. This has the benefit of not only being very concise, but for the first time in I think history, we have tweetable enterprise Java code, which is a very, very good thing. So here I'm actually using the same JDBC template, but using this very, very concise notation for creating a function reference. Same idea, of course. I'm basically creating an interface at runtime, but in code it looks much, much more concise. Other features like the JSR 3.10 support. This is basically Stephen Colburn's JOTA-time API are now part of JDK 8, and of course this support propagates all the way through Spring, so you can actually use Spring's binding and validation support wherever appropriate with JSR 3.10. Other nice features like repeatable annotations inside of Java 8 are also supported inside of Spring where appropriate. Of course, any discussion of Spring 4 would be incomplete without talking about the continually improved REST support. One nicety, this is not a huge feature, but it's a very convenient little thing, is this @REST controller annotation is syntax sugar for @controller, and then that lets you drop off the response body for each method. So while this doesn't do anything you couldn't technically do in previous versions of Spring for many years, it does reduce the sort of notational complexity quite a bit, just because you get to remove an annotation per method. So that's very nice. And one thing a lot of people are looking forward to inside of Spring 4 is, of course, our WebSocket support. So of course, Spring 4 supports JSR 3.5.6. but we've also got improved support to support a couple of use cases that the JSR by itself don't meet. So first of all, WebSockets, while nice, aren't universally available in browsers, and so we need some sort of fallback option. Again, I wouldn't want to name names or point fingers, but some browsers are maybe a little bit slow to implement this, or they have now recently implemented it, but up until say version 10, they didn't have complete support for it. Again, I won't name names, but I guess I suspect you guys can probably guess which browser that is. So you want a fallback option. That's an important part of building modern web applications. And then, in addition, the JSR is to WebSockets what servlets are to HTTP endpoints. It works, but basically, if you want to do any kind of routing, you end up funneling everything through a central handler and then doing an if-then-else check. So mapping based on the destination of your messages isn't natural in this case, because you end up funneling through this one single handler. You need some sort of controller, after all, right? So both of these things we've addressed with our support. We've actually got support for sock.js, which is a superset of the WebSocket protocol. So you can use that with the sock.js client and get graceful degradation of the bidirectional channel across different browsers, even though that don't support WebSockets natively. And of course, Spring 4 supports the Stomp protocol, which is modeled after HTTP frames, and we support it on top of WebSockets. This is something you can use. You can also plug into a broker like RabbitMQ or ActiveMQ, so you don't have to. You can use a simple broker that you set up inside of Spring MVC, or you can use one that plugs into something else like that, like a RabbitMQ broker. This gives you a messaging protocol, and in this way, you can take advantage of messaging style semantics to build your very reactive web applications. Here's an example of an endpoint inside of a controller that will receive a message and then handle it and forward it to the topic that we want to. The message it's sent out to anybody who's listening on topic/greetings. So the messages come in at /greeting from a client, and they get routed to topic/greetings. There's another endpoint type called a subscribe event, at subscribe event, and that gives you the chance to send back data to the client without routing through the broker immediately. So that lets you even handle the subscription event for Stomp. And this is a very natural component model for building applications. Routing in this case, of course, is based on the destination header of the message. So at message mapping /greeting. This will feel very similar to at request mapping inside of Spring MVC. Configuring such WebSocket support, of course, is fairly straightforward. Here's an example of a configuration class, and we turn on the simple WebSocket message broker support. Here, turning it on for a portfolio project. And above this, beyond this, there's of course lots of great features as well. But I just wanted to give you kind of the broad strokes. Of course, Java EE7 is very well supported inside of Spring 4. The new datetime, we already looked at the datetime API, but in addition to that, the bean validation and concurrency APIs, the new servlet and JMS and JTA cuts are supported, and as I just described, the JSR 356 is well supported, and even the batch JSR, which we actually had a hand in helping to craft, is of course very well supported. So we're very happy to support Java E7. There's a lot of stuff there. I hope you guys will check out the release notes as they're being made available. So with that, Yann, did you want to resume?
Josh,
yes, thank you, Josh, for this nice introduction. And any questions up there, or shall we just continue now?
I think we can continue and then come back to the questions.
Okay, so my screen is visible. Okay, so my name is Yann Cébron. I'm one of the Spring developers in IntelliJ IDEA team, and while today we will focus on what's new in IntelliJ 13, I quickly also want to talk about some basic concepts so that everybody maybe who is not very familiar with how Spring support in IntelliJ works can understand what we are doing here. So in IntelliJ we have modules which combine certain related functionality, and modules can have facets. And we have here a Spring facet which needs to be added to one module. And they have the concept of file sets, which more or less resemble application contexts. So you can actually remodel your application contexts or multiple application contexts as you configure them in your application in this Spring facet. So IntelliJ IDEA will understand how the relationship between configuration files or Java configuration works together. So resolving and navigation and all this IDE functionality works as expected. Okay, so much for a very quick introduction into Spring, because it's very important to get right, and we'll come back to that issue later when we show some new stuff in this area. Yes, as just said, Spring 4.0 has very tight integration with Java EE7, which is also one very big area in IntelliJ 13, which has been enhanced a lot. So we already support all the new specifications from Java EE7. We also have support for the new batch specification, for example. So everything is already there to try out if you want to. Okay. I've prepared a small fake project, which is very simplistic in some aspects, but it's, I think, a good way to show off new features without introducing too much of code. So the first issue I want to talk about today is bean documentation. So you all know about the possibility to invoke quick documentation for code. Which is now a feature which also works on Spring Beans. So if my cursor is now located on a Spring Bean reference, like it is right now, I can use the shortcut to show quick documentation, and it will show me the name, the type of the Spring Bean, and the location. This also works if your Spring Bean has some nested description tag. It will include this documentation as well. So I think that's very handy if you need to quickly look up any bean or want to know more about it. Something that works together with the new documentation, or what we just saw, was the type of the Spring Bean is now displayed in the documentation, and this type is now also more clever with regard to special beans. So here we have a util constant bean, and you will read Spring constant for the type of the Spring Bean. We have extended this to most, if not all, known standard beans in the Spring namespaces we support. So Spring map, of course, is also detected, as well as a task scheduler. And you can also navigate to any Java class right from here, so that's very convenient if you want to look up something very quickly. Another thing which is a bit related to that is the presentation, which has been enhanced in IntelliJ 13. So we have now the bean icon, which will change depending on the bean type. So here we have an abstract bean, and this abstract bean has a small difference in the icon, so you can recognize it visually very easily. The same is true for prototype beans, which have this small n on the icon, and everywhere in the user interface these icons will be used. So it's very easy to catch different kinds of beans. So sometimes you want to use one of the refactorings in Spring as well. And we had a long-standing request for more intelligence with renaming beans. So I'm going to rename this bean right now. And in IntelliJ 13, we have introduced completion for renaming beans. So it will complete or show proposals according to the class type of the bean. And if I choose a bean ID which is already used, it will also show me an error as well as the corresponding location of the bean. So you can't introduce naming errors by accident. So the next feature I want to talk about is injection. We've had language injection for a long time in IntelliJ IDEA provided by the IntelliLang plugin, which allows you to inject languages into, for example, strings or XML attributes or values. And this has been extended to references as well. So you can now use it also for Spring resource references as well as for Spring Bean references. And I have this small example, which is a custom wrapping context, which, for example, could be located in your own project, which wraps a real application context behind it. And let's look what we can do with reference injection. So here we have the construction of our contacts, and we pass in as parameters the locations of the configuration files. And I can now use the intention to inject a language or reference. And I will inject the new reference type Spring resource path. And then IntelliJ will understand that the string is now a reference to a Spring resource. So it understands the class path prefix as well as the other prefixes which are known from Spring resource type. So that's very useful if you have, or if you want to use the Spring resource type in any location. The next reference we have is for Spring Beans. So let's say my wrapping context has a method to find a bean by its ID. Usually you would have no autocompletion, or at least not a very useful autocompletion in this context. So let's inject a reference to a Spring Bean name in this method. And now you will have the autocompletion you already know from Spring XML config or Java config files. And of course, as always, navigation works as well as anything else which is available for Spring Bean references. So the last injection I want to show very quickly, which has been available before 13, but maybe it's not known to many people. So if you have some kind of EL expression, maybe Spring EL or just the plain EL, you can as well use this here. So we'll just tell that our method resolve Spring EL expression expects Java EL, a Spring EL expression. And now you see the highlighting has changed. So it will even resolve EL variables, and you have auto-completion as well here in your Spring EL expression. Okay, the next topic is about configuration. So I showed you in the beginning the Spring facet, which is needed to configure the Spring application context in your project. And what we have added is additional checks on project load, which will guide you to setting up your Spring context. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to close this project and reopen it. And we have this notification here on the right upper corner, which tells us that some unconfigured Spring configuration files have been found in this project. So we can actually show them right from here. And these were, of course, set up by me so that we have some bad configuration in this project. You can as well open the Spring facet in the corresponding module. And it will also repeat this error in the Spring facet, so you cannot miss anything in your module. And of course, if I edit the context here, the error will go away because now my application is properly configured. There's a separate entry here for programmatic contexts found. This is something which is not released in 13 yet, but we are working on it. So what's a programmatic context? Some people use programmatic context setups for the applications, maybe for standalone or command line application, for example, or just for convenience. So here we instantiate a class path XML application context from Spring, and IntelliJ is highlighting now the usage of such a programmatic context. Just going to close this notification, and I can now use the intention to set up this Spring context, this programmatic context, and it will set up the context in the Spring facet for me. What it does not do yet, and which is the thing which is missing, which will be delivered in 13.1, is gathering all the information about the programmatic setup and auto-configuring this context for you in your Spring facet. So that's very easy also to detect and set up such contexts correctly in your IDE. Okay, as I said, that's just a teaser. This programmatic context detection is coming in 13.1. What I didn't show you was how to suppress, for example, such warnings. So let's remove this Java configuration again to make it wrong. And immediately it will show a warning also in the editor. So you will also see configuration editors, configuration errors in your editor as you type or as you change your code. And of course, you also have quick fixes here to set up an application context. And you can choose any existing application context right from here. And it will add this configuration file to the existing context. But you can also create a new application context as you like. It depends, of course, on your application. Okay, that's about the configuration changes. And what is very new, of course, is also the detection of unconfigured Java configuration files or code configuration files. We always had detection and highlighting for unconfigured XML files. So also now your code configuration files will be checked for proper configuration. And the focus on annotation-based config is my keyword to hand over to Josh again, who will show some stuff or do some live coding, which heavily involves annotation-based config.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to show you guys what it looks like to create a brand new application from scratch and to get the job done as quickly as possible. I mentioned earlier the Spring.io website. You can go to those guides that I mentioned, and each one of those is backed by Git repository, and you can, of course, follow those Git repositories to get working examples of different things. But another avenue is just to, piece it together using Spring Boot. Spring Boot is, as I mentioned, a way of building applications that focuses attention on that which you're trying to do and sort of does everything else by convention wherever possible. Spring will, Spring has always had convention so long as you check the boxes, so to speak. So here we're checking the boxes for you by looking at your application context. We're looking at the class path, and wherever possible, we do things for you, assuming there aren't reasons not to. And those reasons might be, for example, beans that we don't need to provide because you've already provided one yourself. And in these examples, our support will back off. It'll not try and do something for you. But really, if you have something on the class path, for example, then you'll have to opt out of having that support. And that's a nice way to go, because all you're going to do is add things to your class path and you get more features and you can tailor them, but the customization is minimal. A great way to get started with Spring Boot is to use this little web service. You go to start.spring.io. I'm going to say org. IntelliJ and Spring go in. Demo, of course, that is actually what this is. So there we go. We're going to say we want the web support, right? So this will bring this is going to generate a Maven project for us that has all this prepackaged web support we want. We're going to go ahead and choose JPA support, and we're just going to go ahead and let it generate a Maven project, like so. Just going to download, go to the Finder. There's our application. I've, of course, fearing the demo gods like I do, I've always got a backup, but just in case, we're going to go ahead and run through this and live code ourselves something interesting, something powerful very, very quickly. So this is the old one. We'll go ahead and start again. Starter. I'm going to go ahead and just open a regular Maven project, right? So I'm going to go ahead and choose pom.xml. Would I like to open the project? Absolutely. New window, please. And of course, this launches us into IntelliJ, where we're confronted with a fairly Spartan project. We've got a pre-built test which does next to nothing, basically, and a bunch of code. What is going on? I have angered something here.
Josh, I guess XML file is broken with ampersand.
Sorry?
XML file is broken here.
Oh, yes. My fault. And so our web service needs to be fixed. Enable auto import, absolutely, yes. Good. So lesson there is don't put ampersand in your generated output. Thank you for that. Good catch. So okay, we have a very Spartan directory structure. We have a public static void main, inside of a class, and it says @enable auto configuration. This is Spring Boot's queue, telling it to do whatever it can for us on our behalf based on convention. Remember, we've chosen to have the Spring Boot start a web, and we want the actuator, and we want JPA support, as well as testing support, but we'll ignore that for now. And what this gets you is all the libraries you're going to likely need to do web applications, and all the libraries you're going to likely need to do JPA database applications. So this is an opinionated, we're going to do everything we can to be useful out of the box sort of thing. Let's go ahead and build just a simple application. We'll start using the default approach, which is public static void main. We're going to actually build a web application, but you can still leave it like this, or we can convert it into a WAR. We'll do that in a little bit. So let's just imagine a fictitious, some sort of database of bookings for a restaurant. I don't want to get too deep into the domain model, but we'll just work in terms of bookings, okay? So first of all, we need a booking entity. Go ahead and create that. We're going to probably need a configuration class, right? So we'll create a configuration class for our application. It's going to be backed by a database, so we'll create a database repository, a booking repository. What else do we need? We need a controller. We want a RESTful service to deal with this, so booking REST controller. And then it would be nice to have a web page as well, so we'll go ahead and build a MVC controller. Let's see now. So this is going to be a JPA entity, a JPA application. So I'm going to go ahead and import the JPA annotations here, and we'll just use IntelliJ to kind of breeze through this as much as possible. And then of course booking empty, and then we want this. Go ahead and generate the accessors and mutators. Or Command-Alt-L to get code formatting. This is, of course, a primary key and a generated value, so we'll leave it like that. And then, of course, this is a custom column, so we'll leave it like this. Name, thank you, validation. This is a REST controller, and as I mentioned before, we're going to be using Spring 4, so we have a convenient annotation there. We want to be able to load all the bookings whenever somebody goes to a RESTful endpoint. So we'll create an endpoint that delivers a collection of bookings like that. And right now we don't have a way to satisfy that requirement, so we'll just implement null. Add controller for the RESTful, for the HTML page rather. And then we need a repository. So here we're going to actually take advantage of something called Spring Data, which gives us the ability to do finders, based on convention. And to show you an example, I'll say extends JPA repository. I'm going to go ahead and say that we want to build a JPA repository for entities of type booking with an ID of type long. And I can do anything here. I can actually create like a list of booking objects by name. String name. I can say, here's my query is gonna, the query is gonna be generated by convention by looking at this method name. Spring Data is gonna say, oh, you want a query that finds bookings by name, and of course behind the scenes that'll get translated into something like, booking B where b.name equals etc. Okay. That's very convenient. We don't need to worry too much about that. And then, of course, to configure all this, we need to, turn on a few features that Spring Boot hasn't already turned on for us. So first of all, we'll create an empty configuration class. Right on. We're going to turn on transaction management, and we're going to turn on Spring Data web support. And then that is it. We don't actually have any beans to configure per se in this application because Spring Boot will do so much of it for us. Let's go ahead and flesh out the pieces here. This is going to be a controller, a RESTful controller for our bookings. And in order to make it work, we're going to inject or AutoWire, in this case, a reference to our booking repository. Here I say this.booking.repository, find all, voila. And then what else do we need? Let's test. I think that should be a good start. Oh, we probably need something to actually insert the data for us. So we're going to rely on the fact that Spring Boot needs convention, and it can work with just convention. So we're going to create a new directory here called the source main resources, like so. And we'll tell IntelliJ to please go ahead and just be aware of that new directory. And Spring Boot will look by default for a file called application.properties. Of course, you can support other property files just like you normally would by using the @property source annotation or the context, the property placeholder resolution mechanism in the XML. So here's the property file, and we'll look at that in a bit. And then right now we also want to load data for our application. So we want to be able to load SQL in particular, each time the application is running. So I'm going to go ahead and use my little cheat sheet here just to save some time, like so. Go ahead and change, we need that, of course. I don't know, just whatever, that's fine. Okay, so we'll leave it like that. When Spring Boot starts up, it'll see data.sql. It'll see that we've configured a database, or that we want to, talk to a database. It'll also see that we've got the H2 libraries on the class path, for example, and it'll give us an embedded database if we don't provide one by ourselves. So if I go back down here and I configure a bean of type data source, then it won't create one for me. But since I haven't, it'll just assume I want an embedded one since it's got certain libraries on the class path, which is very smart. That's very convenient. It does what I need, but it doesn't get my way if I want to do something different. Okay. So data.sql is loaded. The application components are here. We'll come back to this guy in a second, and I think that's a good start. So right-click on this, choose one as an application. Wait for this to go. Again, the @enable auto configuration is where all the magic is happening, right? So this is actually just it's going to look at the application. It's going to look at the components that are registered in the application and realize, oh, this is a web application. We should probably go ahead and start up Tomcat for us, so that they can develop quicker. So localhost, like so, should get you those 4 different endpoints. Right? That's just REST, of course, nothing special. Again, all that data, all the JPA support is provided by Spring Data. We didn't have to write much code at all for that. And of course, since it's Spring Boot and we're trying to help you be production ready, you can get access to the rest of the application. So, for example, env, the endpoint there, comes out of the box just by having that Spring Boot starter actuator library on the class path. Health is very convenient for developers who want a look at what's going on. And so, for example, I actually have an error in my code here in my SQL. You can see that that's been reported. Good to know. Very good to know. Where did I screw it up? Anyway, come back to that. And then, of course, you get things like beans, which shows you all the beans in your application context. You get things like metrics, which shows you how many requests have been made to which different endpoints, and also where relevant the status codes of those different endpoints. So I've made one call to the env endpoint that had a response of status code 200, etc. So all this stuff you get just for free. We haven't done a lot of code at all to get this working, but we can do better. I mean, let's go ahead and take a look at what it means to, work from HTML page to render an HTML page. Again, based on convention, Spring Boot expects templates to be inside of the templates directory. We can choose different styles for templates. I'm going to go ahead and use Timeleaf. Timeleaf is a very, very powerful library for doing HTML5 natural templates that are very similar in style to those of the Wicked or Tapestries templates, etc., or Facelets, sort of, from JSF, although that's a bit of a stretch. So I'll go ahead and add that dependency here. Again, very convenient to do. I can use IntelliJ's marvelous Maven support here, so you can see all the different options I have available. It's a transitive dependency that's in dependency management from the Spring Boot starter parent, so all I got to do is import it. I don't have to specify the version in this case. And then once I've done that, Spring Boot has everything it needs to automatically configure the engine for me and know to look in the templates folder for templates that we want to use to render stuff. I'm going to go ahead and just use this template here. So we're going to call this one bookings. It's just going to enumerate the bookings that we have. Nothing fancy here, just a very basic Timeleaf template. You can see it's got a div element, which has a special Timeleaf th namespace, and I can use the special syntax booking of bookings, and then render this out. If you were to open this up in something like Dreamweaver or an HTML editor, you'd actually get a reasonable facsimile of what's happening. This is just dummy text. This won't actually be rendered at runtime. Again, that makes it a natural fit for the integration here in IntelliJ, but also in things like what is it, the WebStorm. I mean, the awesome, factored out web application tooling. And let's see what else. The last thing we want is to reload our templates. So we're going to go ahead and just use a properties file and tell Spring that we want to go ahead and not cache the templates so that when we're doing development, it'll just reload and reload for us. That way we don't have to wait, each time. We don't have to reboot just to update the template. So I'll go ahead and hit stop. And the last thing we need here, of course, is actually an MVC controller for our endpoint. So again, here we'll just use the booking repository, create a request mapping, an HTML page, string always say please, it's very important. Go ahead and use a Spring MVC model. Go ahead and add an attribute or two. Okay. Again, by default, it's just going to look for the view named after this, named in the same way or based on convention as the string that we return from this controller method. So this will render an HTML page and delegate to this timeleaf template that we have here, and the RESTful controller just renders the collection and the objects directly using JSON, since our client specifies an accept header with JSON in it. We can now relaunch or debug. Of course, this is after all just a regular Java program. And we're just doing everything inside of the editor here. There's no reason to sort of conceptually move away. If we had actually specified a data source, there's great tooling inside of IntelliJ for connecting to a SQL database and manipulating everything and doing autocomplete there. And even inside of our HTML, we could have used all of IntelliJ's really great CSS and JavaScript support. For example, web jars is a way of bringing in jars nicely. And there's nothing sweeter than a really good tool that knows about JavaScript and knows about how to refactor things like JavaScript and CSS. So, okay, our application, of course, is back up. Bookings still works the way we expected to, but now we can go to the HTML endpoint and get the same data back in HTML. Again, this has all just been code. I haven't needed to worry about anything else. I mean, I've put everything in one class here just for convenience, right? But it's also because it's very approachable. I mean, you don't really have to. There's not a lot of concerns to think about here, right? This is all just sort of the application you'd write on the back of a napkin, and in this case, it practically runs even in that shape, One last thing, of course, is you can also build. Right now, this is configured to create an Uber jar. So if you build this application as is with Maven, you'll get an Uber jar, which you can then Java jar and then run on any container, including in the cloud. For example, on our open source platform as a service like Cloud Foundry or Heroku, etc. But you might just as easily deploy it into a servlet container. So in order to do that, you extend Spring Boot Servlet Initializer, and then you can override the configure method here. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and specify application.class. And then finally, we can go ahead and change our build here. We don't need the jar anymore. We can say we want a var rather, right? So just autocomplete our way to the finish line there, and disable the plugin. Do a Maven rebuild just to make sure everything's happy, and then we'll see the application is now easily deployed. So I can go ahead and create a new configuration. Hit add new Tomcat server local. I've already got a Tomcat 047 specified locally, so I'll go ahead and specify all that, and then I'm going to specify that I want to deploy my application exploded, by the way, which is great because you can always just Command F9 or Control F9 and get all the things updated as you go. And then here we go. Go ahead and stop the run one and start the web application through Tomcat proper. And of course, this works just fine in any other. This is a lightweight servlet container like Jetty, but it also works fine in more traditional application servers like WebSphere and so on, and JBoss and whatever you want, right? So there's the actual application now running from Tomcat. And of course, Tomcat works fine inside of IntelliJ. Everything else seems to work great inside of IntelliJ. And new in the latest version, of course, is one of my favorite new developments is the Cloud Foundry support. So if we had more time, I could just click create this, sign in, etc., and then deploy. But I'll just leave it to your imagination. You can get this entire application, working REST, working web application, etc., and then deployed to production, all within 5 minutes or whatever, 10 minutes in webinar time. not bad, I think, and I think it's because this editor makes it so easy to kind of work through code. You don't have to worry about the nonsense. And Spring, of course, loves making it easy to get through the nonsense. Okay, so Yann, I think I'm.
Okay, thank you, Josh. That was very, very interesting. And okay, we are a bit short on time now, so I will rush through the last remaining items I want to show in IntelliJ. So just for the record, no problem. We have a couple. Okay, here I am.
I'll stay late. We can stay after the webinar to take questions, of course, right?
Yes, of course we will.
Okay,
so,
good.
We have a couple of new inspections for XML configuration files, which will highlight superfluous or, just redundant configurations, as well as wrong configuration when you, for example, mix factory and class instantiation. We have, of course, auto-wiring inspections. So this one here is correct, although it's never used, so that's why it's gray. But this one here, we have two candidates. So what I can do is add a qualifier and just tell which one I want to use. And of course, I can navigate to it again. And a couple of other things for auto-wiring have been improved as well. And one thing which is very nicely improved in IntelliJ 13 is better messages for constructor mismatch. So if you have constructor args configuration in your bean and they don't match the actual constructor you are attempting to use, you will get a very detailed information now what is wrong and what needs to be changed. Okay, so much for highlighting improvements, and now to one very big new feature in IntelliJ 13, which is the new Spring tool window, which we haven't shown yet. So what does it do? It gives you a very good navigation ability to not only see your modules here in the first column. In the second column, we show now the file sets, which we configured in the Spring facet, as well as the corresponding Spring configuration files, XML or application files, code files, and here we have the list of resulting beans, as well as the documentation window, so you can easily scroll to your application, see all the beans at once, see what they are about, get all the documentation all in one place. So that's very convenient if you are searching for some bean or for some configuration problem in your Spring application. Another very neat feature is enabling the graph, so it will show a small graph window under the documentation, or can also disable the documentation. So you see the direct relationships of the currently selected bean. You can also navigate to the bean just by double-clicking to its item in the list, and there's a couple of other navigation and filtering possibilities as well, so that's very powerful. The next thing is about Spring MVC support. We have worked on improving the documentation possibilities as well there, so we have a very basic request mapping here, and I'm just now going to switch to the MVC tab, which is of course also new in IntelliJ 13, and here you will have the list of all URLs as well as the controllers. So here's my request mapping, and here we can actually see the documentation for the request mapping as well. And I've prepared a bit more complicated controller here, which has a couple of more annotations and parameters as well, and they will also be shown in the documentation window, so you can actually see the path variables as well as their types, and you see the HTTP methods which are allowed at this request mapping and much more.
Yeah, that's really amazing. A lot of people, it seems like some people want to be able to use and configure everything with Spring MVC from from one central place, and others want to be able to use the annotations, but then they risk having their mappings and the routes spread across their controllers. Now with this, you can have both. You can have your convenient, code next to your endpoints and configuration next to endpoints, and then still get the bird's eye view of all your application controllers. That's really great.
Yeah. This documentation is also available from any other place in the IDE. So when I have auto-completion here to some URL, I can also invoke the documentation here and see at a glance what parameters I need to pass in, if it's a get method or a post method, request mapping, everything else. So that's very convenient to navigate. Apropos navigation, we also have this small little icon here, which allows us to actually navigate to the related view of the request mapping. So you can just click here, go to the corresponding view. Of course, we also resolve any model properties here. As you can see, refactoring, of course, works across everything. So I think that's a very nice addition to have the documentation and the navigation from the Spring MVC window for your web applications. And then we have two other topics which I'm just going to tell you without showing samples. We now support the add context hierarchy annotation for test contexts. And we also finally support MongoDB as well as Neo4j and Gemfire repository annotations, as well as the corresponding XML configuration tags from their namespaces. So we are up to date in this area as well now. Okay, that's all we could fit in this small 1 hour webcast. So we are coming to the conclusion now, and just very.
Is there anything
short...
awesome to announce?
Yeah, we have some stuff to announce. So what's coming in IntelliJ 13 dot point releases for Spring support? We are going to publish actually a Spring Open API for third-party plugin developers. So if you are planning to support your own XML or Java context annotations for any Spring plugin, for example, or for your own home-built Spring framework, you will be able to do it using this Open API. And of course, we expect other plugin developers to step in and maybe develop some more plugins for the Spring support in IntelliJ for lesser-known Spring sub-projects. And for 13.1 support, we're going to work very hard on the Spring MVC support. We will work on the add enable web MVC as well as Java config, full Java config support for Spring MVC applications. And of course, we will update with the latest releases of all the Spring sub-projects we already support, integration security, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, especially with the upcoming Spring 4.0 release in 2 days, I think. And yeah, that's all from me. So
that's amazing, man. This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks, Josh and Yann. And thanks everyone for attending. And make sure to visit our website and download the latest version of IntelliJ IDEA, as well as go to spring.io website to find all the guides how to get started with Spring. And of course, follow us in Twitter so you get all the news.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one more section is, I think we have enough time to go through the list of all the questions and answer them.
I'm looking at some of them now, too. One question was, can you show how to migrate to a full-blown WAR? And of course, we then answered that. Let's see. Do you see any questions there? Oh yeah.
Let me. I guess Josh already showed how to migrate Java config to WAR.
Yep, the Spring Boot app. By the way, I'm STARBUXMAN on Twitter. If you want to find me there, and Yann is the same as his name, but without space.
Any details on when closure support is coming in Spring 4?
I don't know if we have Spring closure support specifically planned, but after all, it is just a bunch of JVM types at the end of the day. So even if we don't have a specific idiomatic integration, you can still use it from closure. Obviously, it would be cool to see a more Lispy take on certain things. That'd be awesome.
One more question. It asks if you have more than one bean matched to the outward dependency injection. Mm-hmm. So it's highlighted as with a red line in the IDE. One of these beans is used for test purposes. So how to handle this? Yann, would you mind answering this question? Personally,
is it in the list of the questions?
For instance, if you use more than one bean, which match the dependency injection, outward dependency injection, and the injection highlight with red.
Yeah, there can be multiple reasons for that. So one reason which is very common is just some misconfiguration of the Spring facet. So that's the first issue to check if the Spring configuration setup in your IDE resembles what your application actually should do. If that doesn't solve it, then please file a bug with more information, and we will take a look at that. So it's hard to answer this without a specific context.
Yes,
so.
Sorry, Yann. The question was if one of these beans is used for tests only. So personally, I guess you could use profiles and choose profile so that they correctly highlight dependencies.
Okay, so the configuration for test contexts, which are used, for example, for integration tests, is usually separated from the production context. So you don't need actually to configure anything in your Spring facet for the test context, because it will automatically pick up everything from the code. So if you have maybe configured some manual context, you should delete it and try again if it works. Now, if it doesn't, then please file a bug again with specific code examples, and we will investigate.
Yeah, one more question. So Peter asks if we have the similar to window for Java EE. Yes, we do, and it's named Java Enterprise. So if you open any Java EE project, you'll find it.
Cool.
One more question on Spring profile annotation.
Cool.
Asks if there are any improvements on Spring profile support. Or I guess if you find something broken with that, you should definitely report it, because it's supposed to work out of the box.
I'm sorry. Oh, you go.
Okay, there are questions about the Spring MVC support, especially for the path attribute from Barry. Yes, it's a known missing link in our support, and there's even a ticket for it if you can look it up in our bug tracking system. It's on the list of Spring MVC improvements we are planning for 13.1.
What was the question, though?
To validate the path attribute of the Spring MVC custom tags for JSP, so as to navigate to the corresponding backing beans, for example.
Oh, okay. Oh, JSP. Well, yeah, cool. I'm surprised you guys don't already have that. This stuff is usually
One more question, I guess.
really so great. What's the next question?
I'm sorry, one more question on Gradle support. Is there any plans to provide Gradle builds for examples on Spring website? I guess there are already some examples with Gradle build file, right?
Yes. So all of those guides that I mentioned at spring.io/guides are available both as Gradle and Maven palms. So every single one of them is, and wherever possible, we use Spring Boot. So you'll have, in fact, the guides feature the Gradle build and then a link to the Maven one. So Gradle first, actually, on all of them. I hope that helps. Does that answer the question?
That's it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
John,
Seems to be.
Thank you, man.
All.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to Josh again for joining us and showing us some impressive usages of Spring and IntelliJ.
And thank you for showing me an impressive IntelliJ.
Thanks all. Have a good day.